Hi, I'm Andrea Anthony, and you're watching Eat, Drink, and Bake with Andrea. Today is all about down-home cooking. That means comfort, stick-to-your-ribs food. And I'm using some interesting ingredients today. Let me talk a little bit about the recipes though. We're doing a roast tenderloin of pork with a Kentucky bourbon sauce. And we're also doing roasted new potatoes with garlic and rosemary. And for dessert, we have apple cake with cream cheese frosting, raisins, and walnuts. Really stick to your ribs. But I want to talk a little bit about the olive oil I'm using today, which is Colavita brand California olive oil. And we're going to use this in the marinade that we'll use on our pork. And it's a mild olive oil, so it doesn't fight the flavors going in there. I'm going to try this today. And also, I have my exotic spice blend for the marinade. It's the perfect mix of sweet and savory. So let's get started. This recipe is in two parts. We have our marinade, which we're using our Colavita brand extra virgin California olive oil, which is nice and light and goes really well in the marinade. And we're using my exotic spice marinade. And again, this is mild. It's just got a hint of exotic flavors and the perfect mix of sweet and savory. We're going to mix that along with some fresh squeezed lemon juice and our Colavita olive oil. Then we move on to the Kentucky bourbon sauce, which includes our garlic, some butter, we have brown sugar, a little bit of heavy cream, we use orange marmalade, and some honey, a little bit of allspice for flavor, a little bit of flour to thicken it up, and of course our Kentucky bourbon. So let's get started. So right now we're just going to start with the pork because we have to get this marinated. Now when you get it, there's going to be some connective tissue. You know, kind of look through it. If you see if you see fatty areas, you know, you can just kind of trim them off. All right, and this type of a knife works well, a boning knife. Okay, so you see this? We're just going to take that off. That doesn't really do much for us. Okay, I'm going to put that in the bowl. So we have our olive oil, our lemon, and spices. Let's start off by putting the lemon in the bowl. And we're kind of going to pour our olive oil over that. I'm moving the pork over, putting in our spice blend. Very simple. Now, we're just going to toss it. Now, the thing about this recipe is, if you can, do this the day before. If you can marinate your pork for 24 hours, it's really, really nice. Just gives that extra flavor. But I will say that if you don't have that time or you decide at the last minute you're having this for dinner, give it a good 3 hours will impart enough flavor to your pork to work for the dish. Now, once you've tossed it around, we're going to use a plastic bag because this works really well in the refrigerator. Bowls like this, you need a big bowl so you can toss it, but it takes up a lot of room. Okay, so it's perfectly fine to get this in a plastic bag. You know, these zipper bags work really well. And then just pour the rest of the marinade in. And we're going to close it up. And at this point, it's looking pretty good. So we're going to pop it in the refrigerator, and we're going to start our Kentucky bourbon sauce. Let's get our butter going first. We're going to put our butter in the pan, and we're going to lower that just a little bit. And we can throw our garlic right in there. Now, we don't want to brown it too much. We're going to cook the garlic till it's just transparent. Okay, now we're ready for the brown sugar. You'll need a whisk at this part. So the brown sugar goes in. We're just going to break that apart a little bit, give it a whisk. Okay, we're going to add our orange marmalade and some honey. You know, the combination of the orange, the honey, the brown sugar, the butter, and the garlic just gives this sauce a beautiful flavor. So we just added some of our allspice, and now we're going to add our heavy cream. Now you just want to mix that in slowly, whisking as we go along, just to combine everything. Okay, at this point we're going to add some flour, and that'll thicken our sauce a bit, just whisking as we go. Now I'm going to turn the flame up just a little bit, and let's just let those flavors simmer together for a bit. And that's the time we put in the best part, and that's our Kentucky bourbon. Okay, we're going to whisk that in. Okay, so it looks like we're done. We're going to shut that off, and then let's just add a little bit of salt and a little bit of pepper. Okay, so when we see that it's thickened and we've reduced the bourbon just a little bit, we're good to go. So off our flame goes. Now, what I recommend with this sauce, you can use it right away, or you can use it the next day. But if you plan on using it the next day, when you put it in the refrigerator, it will thicken. So if you have to reconstitute it with just a little bit of water, that's fine too. And then you can proceed on with the recipe. But today, we're going to use it as soon as our pork is finished, and you'll see how beautiful that is and great flavor combinations with our pork. So our pork has been marinating for 3 hours, which is the minimum. And you see I have this on a towel. Okay, so what we want to do now is we're going to take the residual marinade off, and you can just blot it, just a little bit, okay? And I have thrown out the reserve liquids that came out of the plastic bag. We don't use that again. So that gets discarded, and we're just going to blot. You don't want to use paper towels because it will stick to the product. So you can see now that this has the residual marinade. It has entered into the pork, okay? You can see the marinade, the spices that have adhered to it. So we're good to go. And what I'm going to do now is get this over to the stove. We're going to sear it for about 3 or 4 minutes on each side, and then we're going to throw it in the oven. We have a couple of tablespoons of olive oil in our pan. We're just going to put some sliced garlic in here. Want to just get this oil flavored a little bit. So we're going to brown the garlic, keeping it in just a few minutes until we get a nice brown hue, and then we're going to take it out. Okay, we're looking good. No need to brown too much, just infusing that garlic a little bit in the oil. Okay, now we're going to sear. Pan should be nice and hot, so you hear that sizzle. Now we're going to go about 3 or 4 minutes on either side, and then we're going to pop it in the oven. Okay, let's give that a flip. Okay, so we got some browning going here, putting that on the hot side of the pan, which for this pan is right in the middle, so it can sear nicely. Okay, we're going to let that go a few more minutes. Now notice I have the garlic saved. Don't throw the garlic out. Once you've seared it in the olive oil, you can use it in dressings or other dishes. So hold on to that garlic. Don't throw it away. All right, let's give this a couple of minutes and I'll be right back. So it looks like we're ready now. Okay, nice and brown. So we're going to put that on our sheet tray. Okay. Now, just a couple of things to point out. Before you sear, that it has been dried properly or it won't sear correctly. If there's too much liquid in the pan, you're not going to get that sear. So that drying time we did on the cutting board, very, very important to make sure that you get the residual marinade off, and that way it kind of seals in the flavors once it's seared. That's why we do that. We're trying to seal in the flavor and the moisture of the pork, and by searing that, that's exactly what we accomplish. So the next step is we're going to throw it in the oven at 400 degrees for about 20 to 25 minutes. Now, you're going to need a thermometer. We're going to take it out at 145 degrees. After 145 degrees, we're going to let it rest and the temperature will increase. It will cook a little bit more. So it's very important that you have a thermometer handy. You know, it used to be where we couldn't eat pink pork. Not the same anymore. The magic number is 145 degrees, and that's what we're going to look for with this. So we're going to test it maybe after about 15 minutes, and again, depends on how thick the pork is. So you sort of need to keep an eye on this dish. We don't want to overcook it or undercook it. So let's get that going. So it's almost been 25 minutes. So let's take a temp on this and see how we're looking. Again, you can always pop it back in, but once it's overcooked, that's it. And by the way, we have our Kentucky bourbon sauce on the stove staying warm. Okay, so we're gonna use our digital thermometer. You wanna go to the thickest part, and we're looking for 145 degrees. Okay, we're climbing slowly. We're about 136 degrees, going very slowly. I think we need a couple of more minutes. Now this is the part where we have to be careful because we don't want to overcook it. So, and also keeping in mind that there are different thicknesses. So I'm going to give this about another 1 or 2 minutes, and then we'll try it again. So we've let our pork rest for about 15 minutes, which is really important when it comes out of the oven. And we have our Kentucky bourbon sauce, which is all done. So let's get that right in here. And we'll get this started. Now remember, as we said, it can be pink in the middle. This did reach 145 degrees, and you can see it's nice. Now what you're gonna find is the center might be more pink, and you know, different people like it different ways. So the ends, of course, will tend to cook more than the thickest part of the middle. So you can sort of separate that on your dish for people that prefer it a little less cooked. Okay, but you see it's nice and juicy, just the way it's supposed to be. And we're gonna finish that off with our Kentucky bourbon sauce. Okay, so right over the top. Very good, and we keep some on the side for extra, and there you have it. Tenderloin of pork with an exotic spice marinade and a Kentucky bourbon sauce. Enjoy. Our next recipe, roasted new potatoes with garlic, rosemary, and olive oil. Very simple recipe. Let's just talk about how we're cutting the potatoes. Most of them are cut already, but we're gonna cut these in half and then one more time. So you have that size that we're roasting. So in half and one more time. And there we go. Okay, so they're about that size chunks. We're only going to use a couple of tablespoons of olive oil. We're going to toss it in olive oil with a little salt and pepper and some garlic. We're going to roast the new potatoes, and then at the end we're going to mix in some fresh rosemary and more olive oil, because what happens with them is they really absorb all the olive oil, and I've used a 1/4 cup in recipes trying to get more flavor, and it just somehow absorbs in and you don't get that real taste. So what we're going to do is roast them, get them nice and seared and brown in the oven, and then we'll end off the recipe with another level of flavor, which is our olive oil and some fresh rosemary. Now, the thing to keep in mind with fresh rosemary is you use about double of what you would use if this was dry. And now the garlic, we're going to crush it, okay, because we want that to really surround our potatoes. Get it all tossed with the olive oil and the garlic. A little bit of olive oil, just enough to coat. Salt, and we'll adjust the salt and pepper at the end, but you can start off with some. Okay, and now it's just about tossing. I sprayed my pan with a little bit of cooking spray because they're so starchy, and even with the olive oil, they do tend to stick. So a little bit of extra cooking spray always works out nicely. Okay, and you can see that the glisten on these potatoes means that they're all nicely coated. You want to try to get a nice big pan so that we're not doubling up on a layer. So you might have to use 2 if you don't have a big pan. And we're just going to level those out a bit. You want all the heat to get around those potatoes. Now we're going to bake these for approximately 30 minutes until nice and golden. So if you have to go a little longer, you'll go a little longer. You know, it depends on the size of the potatoes. We're going to start with that. And usually I check halfway through, you give them a little toss again, just to kind of even everything out, and we throw them in one more time. So let's get those in the oven. I like to put them on the top rack because heat rises, and that's going to get most of the heat in the oven. So top rack is good. It's been about 30 minutes now, so we're going to give these a look. Okay. Now at that point, what you want to do is you want to test them for doneness, meaning are they tender? And yes, they are tender, but we're going to toss them up a little bit. So we broil them a little bit, just about a couple of minutes, and you can see the difference in hue. These are nice and golden and much more crispy. So either way the recipe works, but I kind of prefer it this way. So let's get these over to our island, and we're going to toss them in our rosemary and olive oil to finish off the dish. So we have our potatoes in the bowl. Now at this point, just taste one because we want to see if it needs any more salt and pepper. I'm thinking just a little bit more salt. So we're going to sprinkle that. The end of the recipe is always a good time to check things like that. Okay, I am a pepper person, so I'm going to put one more pepper in. All right, now for our fresh rosemary, we're going to sprinkle that in. And the olive oil. Now, we're going to do this to taste. So we're just going to drizzle some on. Notice I haven't used all of it. This just adds another level of flavor because it's baked with some olive oil that browned it, and a little bit of salt and pepper, and the garlic. So the garlic is nice and brown and added a level of flavor to the potatoes, but this is sort of the way we finish the dish off. And that's exactly what we have. So let's get that plated. There we go. Roasted potatoes with garlic, olive oil, and fresh rosemary. And now for the best part, dessert. We're doing an apple cake, which has a cream cheese frosting, and the apple cake has raisins and walnuts, and it's just so heartwarming and delicious and really, really comfort food. So let's start with our ingredients. We of course have our apples. I'm going to show you how to cut the apple. Now the thing about baking is oftentimes you have your wet ingredients and your dry ingredients. So for the dry ingredients, we have our flour, baking powder, baking soda, a little bit of salt, and we have our cinnamon, nutmeg, and we have allspice. So those are dry ingredients. We have our apples, and we have our raisins and walnuts. And for the wet ingredients, we have our oil and eggs and some almond extract. Now, even though this is a dry ingredient, our brown sugar, we're going to mix it in with our wet ingredients. And as far as the oil, you want to use a vegetable oil, very mild. You can use avocado oil, safflower, canola, something very mild for this recipe. Okay, so the apples. Now take a look at the kind of cut we have here. All right, they're kind of sliced, but small slices. All right, so I like to do this instead of peeling an apple with a peeler. I find this to go a lot faster. And I'll show you what we do. So I've actually cored it. So the core is out. And now you're just going to take a paring knife and you're going to slide it on the apple and just get that peel off. Right around, trying to keep your knife close to the edge so you don't get too much of the meat of the apple. We're going to start off with our wet ingredients. So we're adding our oil, eggs, and our extract. Now I'm using almond, but you can use vanilla if you're not an almond extract lover. Okay, and we're just gonna mix that a little bit to combine. Now if you're using a hand mixer, that's okay, or an upright mixer works fine, but I use the paddle attachment for this. Okay, well that's combined. Now we're just going to add brown sugar. Now, once you've added that lump of brown sugar, you need to break it up a little bit or you will get splashed in the face. So we're gonna break that up and just combine that just a little bit. Beautiful. We want that nicely combined. And as you can see, you have a little bit of a batter going here. Okay. Now for the dry ingredients. We have our flour. We're adding baking powder, salt, baking soda, and we have our flavoring ingredients, allspice, cinnamon, nutmeg. So now we're going to add our dry ingredients in a little bit at a time, pretty much for the same reason. We don't want it splashing on us, so we're going to give that, I'm going to hedge my bets here and just give that a little bit of a... Okay, batter's good, and you can see nice and smooth. Okay, that's what the batter should look like. A nice smooth batter, nice and thick. At this point, we're gonna add our raisins and the walnuts. You can add those together. Again, pulsing just a little bit to get it going. Not too much, just to combine. And lastly, we have our apples. Now the apples we're gonna put in small little batches here because there's a nice volume of apples. All right, we're good. Everything's nicely combined. Now, I'm using a 9x13 baking dish, and it's been well oiled with a cooking spray. I love those cooking sprays that have the flour in them. It kind of does both, and they work out really well. I think I'm gonna use a spatula. Okay, so now we're just gonna put it in our pan. It's so wholesome, this recipe. And it smells wonderful in the oven. You can smell those aromatic spices, the cinnamon and nutmeg. The allspice really makes the house smell great. You see how the apples are kind of peeking out the top of our batter? Let's just smooth those over a little bit. So it's going to go in for about 30 minutes. Then we're going to rotate the pan so it cooks evenly. And at that point, we check the top. Sometimes it starts to brown quickly. We'll just put a piece of foil over it and we'll let it continue baking until we're going to test for doneness. So let's take a look here. All right, yes, we are going to have to put some foil on. Okay, the top did get some brown, which is fine. So let's just cover it. And we're gonna rotate that so it cooks nice and even. Okay, so 20 to 30 minutes, we want to check it for doneness, and that's with either a sharp knife or a toothpick. We want it to come out clean. So let's give it a little more time and we'll check one more time. Okay, so we're looking good here, but we're going to give it the toothpick test. Okay, if we pull it out, the toothpick is clean, we know it's done. So it's nice and cool, and while that's happening, we're going to start our cream cheese frosting. So for our cream cheese frosting, there's only 4 ingredients. We have our butter, cream cheese, some confectionery sugar, and some pure vanilla. You can see what I mean by stick to your ribs food. So let's get started. Okay, we're gonna put our cream cheese in. Now I will point out that this has been softened to room temperature, which is really important. Okay, we want that nice and soft, and the same with our butter. Now I'm using a salted butter. Let's put the vanilla in. Now you want to test for lumps, okay? So I'm looking here and we're looking smooth. Okay, and that's why we want it room temperature, because if everything is room temperature, you're less likely to get lumps in your frosting. So that really helps, and we're gonna scrape that down just a little bit. We'll be scraping it again, so you don't have to really scrape too much. We're gonna add little bits at a time. This part you have to be really patient. I use salted butter in this recipe because I don't add extra salt. So it's not really necessary to add any more salt to this recipe if you're using salted butter as opposed to sweet butter. So that's what we've done, and it works out just fine. Our cream cheese frosting has been in the refrigerator. And we're just going to take some, and it actually goes right on here. So we're gonna just start to spread it. A nice cake. The flavors, it's got texture with the nuts and the raisins. And the apples have just such a nice flavor for it. And I love the fact that there's cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice, a little spicy cake. It's just a great recipe. And it also freezes nicely. So if you didn't finish it all, you can always freeze some pieces and take them out at a later point. This is definitely our stick-to-your-ribs cake. You know, it's funny, I always picture this cake because of the cinnamon and spices. I sort of picture it as an autumn cake, but it's really good all year round. But those fragrances in the house just remind me of fall. You know, and it's also point-worthy, you know, sort of a rustic cake. It's not one of those perfect cakes. It's sort of rustic and homey and kind of fits in with our theme today of down-home cooking. Okay, on the top, just to add a little contrast, you have some extra cinnamon, and you can just sprinkle just a little bit, not too much, and there you go. We have our apple cake with raisins and walnuts. So we have our home cooked meal today with our tenderloin of pork with Kentucky bourbon sauce, and we have our potatoes, which were roasted with garlic, rosemary, and olive oil, and we ended up with our cake, which was made with apples, raisins, and walnuts. Apple cake with cream cheese frosting, delicious way to end the meal. And with all this rich food, I still like a glass of wine. So today I'm having a Pinot Grigio, which is Fitfine wine brand, which is low in calories, sugar, and carbohydrates. That's what I like about it. It's light, and I don't feel as guilty after having a meal like this. Cheers.